Have you ever wondered, in those quiet late-night moments, how a great empire can rise from almost nothing? How a small group of wandering families, living simple lives on peaceful hillsides, can one day grow into a power that touches 3 continents, shapes hundreds of years, and leaves behind a legacy still felt in food, music, stories, and even the shape of modern cities? And have you ever thought about how the Ottoman Empire, one of the longest-lasting empires in all of human history, began not with thunder or glory, but with gentle steps, soft roads, and a world moving slowly under open skies? That is why tonight, in this calming journey meant to lull you into soft rest, we begin this long story, the entire history of the Ottoman Empire, told in a way that feels almost like a bedtime tale. A story of people, of simple beginnings, of patient growth. A story so wide, yet so peaceful when told slowly, that it feels like drifting along a quiet river at dusk. And as we float gently into this tale, you might feel your body loosen, your breathing slow, and your mind settle into a place of ease, because history, when told softly, can feel like a warm blanket around the spirit. So let us begin in a very distant time, in a land shaped by mountains, valleys, and long stretches of grassland, a place called Anatolia. In those early years, around the late 1200s, the world did not look like the world we know today. The roads were soft dirt paths. The nights were darker, calmer. The stars seemed brighter, as if they were leaning a little closer to the earth. And in the northwest corner of Anatolia, a part of modern-day Turkey, there lived small Turkic tribes who moved from place to place with their flocks, their tents, their simple tools, and their warm cooking fires. Life was slow, and it was steady. Children learned to ride horses before they were tall enough to reach a table. Women prepared meals that simmered for hours, filling the air with the smell of warm bread and gentle spice. Old men sat on carpets outside their tents, telling stories in relaxed voices, letting the night breeze carry the words away into the darkness. And through these simple moments, these little daily rituals, a culture was forming, a culture of community, of loyalty, of patience, and of quiet courage. From among these tribes came a man we know today as Osman, the founder of the Ottoman Empire. At this early point in the story, he was not called a founder. He was not called a king. He was simply the respected leader of a small group of families, trusted by them, listened by them, loved by them. He was a man who believed in careful steps rather than wild leaps, in soft strength rather than loud displays. And it is in that spirit that our story moves forward, slowly, gently, step by step. If you imagine yourself standing on a small rise in the land, maybe on a hill where the wind moves softly over tall grass, you might see Osman's people below. Simple tents made from wool, horses tied near wooden posts, and sheep grazing quietly along rocky slopes. Smoke from small fires rises in thin, peaceful lines toward the open sky. The sound of a shepherd's flute floats lightly across the hills in a tune so slow and steady it feels almost like a lullaby. This right here is where the Ottoman story begins, not in a castle, not in a city, but on open land where a community lived close to the earth. Osman, like many leaders of his time, wanted security for his people more than he wanted glory. The world around them was unstable. The old Seljuk Empire, which once ruled the region, was weakening. Neighboring princes fought one another. Old alliances were fading, and new ones were uncertain. Yet Osman moved with care, believing that steady patience could build something lasting. And it is this quiet belief that slowly planted the first seeds of what would become the Ottoman Empire. The nights in Osman's camp must have felt peaceful, fires glowing softly, pots simmering with warm broth, voices chatting in low tones. But even in that peace, there were dreams. Dreams of growth. Dreams of a place where his people could settle permanently, raise their children, plant crops, and live with more security than nomadic life could offer. The story tells us that Osman once had a dream, a simple but symbolic one, a tree growing from his heart, spreading its branches across lands far beyond anything he had ever seen. Whether the dream is historical or not does not matter here. What matters is the idea, the feeling that something was beginning slowly and gently. And that is how this empire started, not with force, not with pride, but with a dream of stable life and the careful steps of a small community searching for a home. As Osman and his people settled near the small town of Sagat, their days had a calm rhythm. Morning began with soft voices and the sound of animals waking. Women carried water from nearby streams. Men prepared tools, tended to animals, shaped bows, or repaired saddles. Children played with sticks, pretending to be warriors, though everyone laughed softly because they were far too young. The land around Sagat was green in spring, golden in summer, and gentle during autumn. Winters were quiet but could be cold, and yet the people stayed warm by huddling together, sharing food, sharing stories, sharing the soft comfort of a simple life. It was in this slow, steady environment that Osman began building relationships with neighboring tribes and towns. He gained trust. He listened. He helped solve small disputes. His strength came not from fear, but from calm leadership. People followed him because he made them feel safe. Around this time, the Byzantine Empire controlled many of the nearby towns and fortresses. But in the 1200s and early 1300s, the Byzantines were growing weaker, distracted by problems far away from Osman's small corner of Anatolia. Their soldiers were tired. Their leaders were distant. Their supplies were stretched thin. But Osman did not rush to attack them. For many years, he simply watched. He waited. He learned the land. He learned the patterns of the seasons, the movement of traders, and the quiet routines of the nearby forts. He was like a man watching the slow flow of a river, patiently choosing the right moment to step into the water. This patience became one of the most important qualities in the early Ottoman world. As more families joined Osman's group, the camp near Saga grew. Tents multiplied. Fires glowed brighter at night. The sound of laughter carried farther across the hills. Travelers passing through the region began calling the group by Osman's name, Osmanaglu, meaning the sons of Osman. Slowly, gently, a new identity was forming. Not yet an empire, not yet a kingdom, just a community becoming something larger, something steadier. One of the most calming parts of this early story is how natural the growth felt. There was no rush, no wild push for power. The world around them was changing, and they simply moved with it. When opportunities came, they accepted them. When challenges appeared, they faced them with steady hands. This was a time before big cities, before huge monuments. before armies that stretched across horizons. At this moment, the Ottomans were still closer to shepherds than soldiers, closer to storytellers than rulers. Yet inside them, a warmth was glowing, something gentle but strong. The early battles they fought were small, almost like quiet tests rather than storms of war. They would take a small fortress here, a little town there, always with careful judgment. Villagers under Byzantine rule, tired of neglect, sometimes welcomed them. Others simply watched from a distance, curious about the newcomers. Osman would often approach a place not with force, but with words, offering protection, fairness, and a simpler life. This peaceful approach won him more supporters than any sword could. And as support grew, so did the confidence of his people. By the time Osman was an older man, the simple campfires of his youth had turned into small wooden houses, mills, markets, and places where merchants rested with their camels and horses. The gentle ring of a blacksmith's hammer could be heard. The smell of warm bread drifted across the morning air. The sound of a mother humming softly to her baby echoed through the camp. This was no longer just a group of wandering families. It was a small state, a beylik. And even though the world outside was shifting, with wars and rivalries in many directions, Osman's people remained steady, grounded in their simple way of living. As Osman grew older, leadership slowly passed to his son, Orhan, who would help turn this small state into something bigger. But before that next chapter begins, we stay here a little longer, resting in the warmth of these early days, letting the soft beginnings of history settle in our minds like gentle dust on an old wooden table. These early years are often overlooked, but they hold a special kind of magic because they remind us that even the greatest stories start quietly. They start with ordinary people living ordinary lives with small decisions, small dreams, and small steps. And as you breathe gently now, maybe feeling your shoulders drop and your mind soften, you might sense why this story matters, why the entire history of the Ottoman Empire, stretching across 6 centuries, begins with such peaceful scenes. Because to understand how something grows tall, you must first see the seed. And the seed of this empire was planted in calm soil, watered by patience, warmed by community, and shaped by the steady hand of a man named Osman. As we drift deeper into this story tonight, let that gentle question float through your mind like a slow breeze moving across a warm field, guiding us toward the next soft chapter of the Ottoman journey. By the time Osman's life was coming to a peaceful close, the world he built was much different from the one he had known as a young man. The simple tents of the early days had become villages with wooden homes, small markets, and places where passing traders rested. The people had settled into rhythms of planting, harvesting, caring for animals, and sharing meals under wide skies. This was no longer just a wandering tribe. It was the beginning of a small kingdom. And at the center of this quiet growth stood Orhan, Osman's son. Orhan was different from his father in some ways, but similar in all the important ones. He had the same gentle patience, the same calm thinking, the same way of earning trust through soft strength rather than loud shows of power. But he also had something else, an instinct for steady expansion, for bringing order to growing lands, for turning a community into a country. Where Osman planted seeds, Orhan tended the garden. If you imagine the land during this early time, around the 1320s, you might picture rolling hills covered in morning mist with the soft smell of damp earth rising into the quiet air. Farmers moved slowly through fields with tools made of wood and iron. Women baked bread in stone ovens. Children played in dusty streets, laughing in small bursts before returning to their chores. Life was gentle, slow, and warm. Under Orhan, this little world began to stretch outward. More villages joined the Ottoman fold. More families came seeking safety. The Ottomans offered fair taxes, protection from raiders, and simple justice that many nearby rulers could no longer guarantee. People liked that. They liked the stability, the peace, the promise of a calmer life. And so, one by one, towns opened their doors. One of the earliest and most important steps in Orhan's time was the capture of the town of Bursa. It sat between smooth green hills and rivers that flowed like silver ribbons through the land. Bursa was old, with stone walls and winding streets, and it had long been under Byzantine rule. But by the time Orhan looked toward it, the Byzantines were tired, stretched thin by troubles far away. The Ottomans did not rush toward Bursa. They approached slowly, surrounding it with steady patience. They watched the seasons change. They waited through rain and snow. Inside the walls, people grew weary and supplies ran low. Outside, Orhan's men cooked warm stews, tended their horses, and slept under the open sky, never pushing too hard. It was a long, quiet wait. And then, one gentle morning in 1326, Bursa surrendered. There was no destruction, no loud victory, no terrible storm of battle, just a soft passing of keys from one hand to another. And with that single moment, the Ottomans gained their first real city, one that would become a beloved capital for many years. The capture of Bursa felt like a sunrise, slow, warm, and full of promise. In Bursa, Orhan began something new, a place where administration was steady, records were kept, markets flourished, and life carried a calm, steady rhythm. Craftsmen came, scholars arrived, merchants from faraway lands walked its narrow streets and rested in its inns. Imagine wandering through Bursa during those early days. Gentle chatter echoing from stone houses, warm light spilling from workshops, the soft clack of a blacksmith shaping metal, the smell of fresh bread drifting between tall cypress trees. It was peaceful, and from this peace, the Ottomans found strength. Orhan also created the first real army in the growing state. It was small at first, more disciplined than fierce, more careful than wild. The soldiers wore simple clothing and light armor. They carried bows, spears, and small shields. They did not march like thunder. They moved like water, calm, adaptable, steady. They defended villages during storms of conflict. They protected traders during long trips. They kept roads safe so that markets could grow. Their presence made people feel secure, and that security led to more families settling under Ottoman rule. This slow gathering of people created something more valuable than gold: trust. As the Ottomans grew stronger, the Byzantines grew weaker. Not because the Ottomans rushed to attack them, but because the Byzantines were pulled in many directions. Wars in Greece, troubles in the Balkans, divisions in their palace. Their once great empire was tired, like an old tree losing branches in a long winter. Orhan did not take advantage of this with cruelty. He moved in careful steps. He captured towns when it was necessary. He built relationships when he could. He watched the region with calm, patient eyes. And slowly, softly, the map began to change. Around the mid-1300s, something important happened. Something that would guide the Ottomans toward a new world. They crossed into Europe. It was not a dramatic crossing. No heavy armies, no giant ships, no storms. Just a gentle movement, like a breeze shifting direction. In 1354, after an earthquake damaged the walls of Gallipoli, Orhan's son Suleiman Pasha quietly occupied the town. The Byzantines, overwhelmed by their own troubles, could not respond. This moment, so calm, so quiet, became the first step of Ottoman presence in Europe. A step that would one day stretch toward the Balkans, Hungary, Greece, and beyond. But for now, in this early chapter, it was simply a foothold, a small home on a distant shore. As this foothold grew, new opportunities opened. The Ottomans offered fairness to local communities, respected local customs, and allowed people to keep their religion and language as long as they lived peacefully. This gentle approach earned them support, especially in troubled regions tired of heavy taxes and constant wars. Villages began to shift their loyalty. Local leaders sought alliances. Some communities welcomed the Ottomans with warm meals and open hands. It was not a story of conquest. It was a story of transition, slow and quiet. Orhan, now growing older, continued strengthening Bursa. He built mosques that rose quietly over the city, not enormous at first, but graceful, with domes shaped like soft drops of water. He supported scholars who wrote simple advice about justice, kindness, and leadership. He encouraged trade, letting goods from Asia and Europe meet in calm markets where deals were made in low voices. The Ottomans were becoming known not only for their strength, but for their steadiness. Their lands were safe. Their rulers were fair. Their towns were growing. And when people feel safe, they build. They plant. They dream. One of Orhan's gentle but important decisions was the creation of schools and charitable foundations. These places welcomed travelers, fed the poor, housed the tired, and taught children. At night, their halls were quiet, filled with warm lantern light and the soft shuffle of sandals on polished floors. Imagine walking through one of these places, the sound of a teacher speaking in a low voice, the rustle of pages, the scent of ink and old parchment. Students sat cross-legged, listening carefully, learning letters, numbers, stories, and small skills that would later shape their lives. Knowledge, like water, flowed slowly but deeply. Back in Europe, the small foothold at Gallipoli began to grow. New forts were built. Farms were settled. Routes were established. It felt like a calm spreading of roots into new soil. This movement worried the Byzantines, who watched helplessly from a distance. But the Ottomans did not move with fire. They moved with patience, allowing each new region to settle, breathe, and feel part of something stable. They were building not a temporary camp, but a long-lasting home. As the 1350s came to an end, Orhan's health began to fade. He had lived a long life, guiding his people through some of the most peaceful yet important transitions in their early history. Under him, the Ottomans gained their first real city, their first structured army, their first foothold in Europe, and their first taste of true statehood. He saw Bursa flourish. He saw Gallipoli open new doors. He saw his people grow from wandering families into a settled nation. And he stepped back peacefully, knowing the future would be guided by capable hands. His son, Murad I. Have you ever wondered what it feels like when a young power, still steadying its steps, reaches a quiet new doorway? A doorway that leads into a whole different world? And have you ever felt that soft kind of curiosity about how the Ottomans, still calm and careful, began to breathe the cool morning air of Europe, taking slow, thoughtful steps into a land they had only watched from across the water? As we drift into this part of the story tonight, try to imagine that feeling, that gentle crossing, that first moment when a rising state touches a new continent, not with thunder, but with quiet intention. When Orhan's time came to a peaceful close, the land he left behind was steady and full of promise. Bursa stood strong, Gallipoli held firm, and the people lived in calm rhythms, farming, trading, raising families, and watching their world expand with slow confidence. The next leader to step forward was Murad I, Orhan's son. Murad was calm, thoughtful, and deeply patient, much like Osman and Orhan before him. But he carried a different kind of vision too. He understood that the world was changing, that Europe was opening up, and that the Ottomans were now strong enough to explore those new horizons. Murad did not rush. He did not leap. He simply continued walking along the quiet path his father and grandfather had set, step by gentle step. The first years of Murad's rule were peaceful ones, spent organizing the growing lands on both sides of the sea. The foothold in Europe, small as it was, needed structure: farms, roads, guards, and places where people could gather safely. The Ottomans knew that a new region could only grow if it felt stable. So Murad sent steady hands, governors, soldiers, craftsmen, across the waters to settle the new lands with care. Imagine waking up in one of those early settlements, the sun rising over the calm waters of the Dardanelles, the cool breeze drifting across fields, the quiet talk of farmers tending their first crops in European soil. Life moves slowly, softly, patiently, and with each season, the Ottoman presence in Europe grew a little stronger. Not long after Murad began his rule, a gentle but important opportunity arose. The Byzantine Empire, still weary and stretched thin, was facing new troubles, internal struggles, rival claimants, disagreements within the palace. One of those claimants reached out to Murad, asking for help in exchange for land and support. To Murad, this was not a chance for conquest. It was simply a practical choice, a way to help one neighbor while quietly strengthening another corner of his own world. With calm steps, Murad agreed. And so, the Ottomans gained access to more land in Europe, not through battle, but through cooperation, through diplomacy, through the soft give and take of politics. The Balkans, the region just north of Gallipoli, were unlike Anatolia. The land rolled in broader waves. Forests stood tall and cool. Rivers wound through valleys like silver threads. Villages were scattered, each with its own customs, its own traditions, its own memories. For many years, the Balkans had lived through shifting alliances, local rulers, kings, and nobles often changing spouses, treaties, and loyalties like the seasons. In that steady swirl, people longed for something stable, something predictable. The Ottomans, with their calm methods and simple governance, offered exactly that. One of the first major steps into the Balkans happened around 1361, when Ottoman forces, moving steadily under Murad's direction, approached the city of Adrianople, known today as Edirne. Adrianople was old, with grand stone walls and wide streets. It had been an important Roman and Byzantine center for centuries, sitting where rivers met and roads crossed. But by the 1360s, its defenses were thin, its people tired, and its rulers stretched between distant concerns. The Ottomans advanced not with wild fury, but with slow discipline. They built wooden towers. They cut supply lines. They waited, and in that waiting, the city slowly grew quiet. Eventually, Adrianople surrendered, not in a storm, but as a weary traveler handing over his burdens. And with this gentle, almost hushed moment, the Ottomans gained one of their most important cities in Europe. Murad chose Adrianople as his new capital. Imagine that feeling: a new city, a new home, a new center of life on a new continent. Softly, steadily, the world was changing. Life in Adrianople under Murad was peaceful and balanced. Stone houses lined narrow streets. Market stalls sold figs, nuts, fabrics, and warm bread. The sound of water wheels turning along the riverbanks hummed through the air. Travelers from Asia, Europe, and the Mediterranean rested in inns that glowed softly at night with warm lantern light. The Ottomans did not force the city to change overnight. They respected the churches, the markets, the traditions. Over time, new buildings appeared. Mosques with gentle domes, schools with open courtyards, bathhouses where warm steam rose in peaceful clouds. But these blended with the old, forming a calm mixture of cultures. The city became a place where different languages drifted through the streets, where Greek merchants bargained with Turkish farmers, where Balkan families traded handmade tools for spices brought from faraway lands. It felt like a quiet meeting point of worlds. As the Ottomans grew stronger in the Balkans, local rulers began to notice, not with panic, but with curiosity. Many of them had faced long years of conflict with one another, and some wondered whether Ottoman stability might bring peace. So alliances formed. Treaties were signed. Some leaders offered their loyalty in exchange for protection. Others paid tribute, grateful for fewer battles and more predictable seasons. Of course, a few resisted, as people sometimes do when change approaches. But even then, Murad moved with gentle determination, avoiding unnecessary destruction. He preferred negotiation, understanding, and patience whenever possible. And in this slow way, the Ottoman influence spread. Around the late 1360s and early 1370s, the Ottomans met a coalition of Balkan leaders in what history calls the Battle of Maritsa. But in our slow story here, there is no need to focus on the clash itself. What matters is the feeling after it ended. The Ottomans emerged stronger. Their borders stretched wider. Their neighbors, seeing this strength, chose peace more often than conflict. And so the Balkans settled into a new rhythm, still diverse, still full of different beliefs and traditions, but now gently connected by Ottoman roads, Ottoman courts, and Ottoman protection. Murad, though at times involved in conflicts, remained a quiet, reflective ruler. He built bridges, not just of stone across rivers, but of understanding between communities. He encouraged learning. He welcomed scholars from faraway lands. He oversaw the creation of schools, hospices, and charitable foundations. Imagine a quiet evening in Adrianople during Murad's rule. The domes glowing in the last light of the sun. The call of merchants closing their stalls. The soft laughter of families sharing dinner. Horses resting under wooden shelters. And lamps flickering along calm streets. This peaceful picture was not the image of a conquering empire. It was the image of a growing home. As years passed, the Ottomans moved deeper into the Balkans, into modern-day Bulgaria, Serbia, and parts of Greece. But again, they did so with rhythm, not haste. The Ottomans learned local customs. They spoke with village elders. They allowed churches to continue their services. They let farmers keep their land. They supported trade, improved roads, and lowered taxes where needed. These actions won hearts. Not all hearts, of course, but many. Because for people who had lived through years of shifting rulers and uncertain times, consistent leadership felt like a soft breeze after a long storm. One of the most important turning points came at the Battle of Kosovo in 1389, a moment often remembered in grand historical tales. But in this gentle story, we speak of it quietly. The battle was hard, and it carried weight for many cultures. And it was here that Murad's long life reached its final moment. But his death did not cause collapse or chaos. The Ottomans had grown strong roots, deep enough that even a great change could not shake them. Murad's son, Bezadai, stepped forward, carrying the calm determination of his father and grandfathers. And the empire continued. But before we drift toward Bayezid's time, let's stay just a moment longer with Murad, with his slow footsteps through Adrianople, his thoughtful gaze across the Balkans, his steady hand guiding his people into a new world. He was the leader who turned the Ottomans into a true transcontinental power, connecting Anatolia and Europe with bridges of culture, trade, and trust. And he did it in a way that felt natural, almost gentle, as if the land itself was welcoming the change. By the time we step quietly into the late 18th century, the Ottoman Empire has walked a very long road. It has seen triumph, it has seen challenge, and it has settled into a rhythm of life that moves at its own pace. But now, the world beyond its borders is shifting. New ideas are spreading across Europe. New machines are reshaping industries. New armies, trained in fresh ways, are marching with a kind of precision the older world had never seen before. The Ottomans, for centuries confident in their own traditions, begin to notice this changing wind. And at first, the response is gentle, cautious, almost hesitant, like someone slowly testing the water with the tip of their toe. There is no rush. The empire still stretches over vast lands, from the Balkans to the deserts, from mountains to calm river valleys. But the question quietly rises inside the minds of some leaders. Should we change too? Should we move with the world rather than remain apart from it? In the soft glow of this question, reforms begin to take shape. It starts small. Ottoman ambassadors are sent to European capitals, not just for diplomacy, but to listen, observe, and learn. They watch new methods of war, new styles of government, and new ways of organizing the world. When they return, They carry not only letters and official reports, but also quiet whispers of fresh possibilities. One of the earliest steps is the attempt to improve the old military system. For centuries, the Janissaries have been the backbone of Ottoman strength. They once formed one of the world's most disciplined armies, feared and respected. But by the 18th century, they had become powerful in politics, resistant to change, and deeply attached to their traditions. Whenever someone suggested teaching new tactics or bringing in new weapons, the Janissaries pushed back, firmly, even angrily. They worried about losing their status, their comfort, their old way of life. Still, some Ottoman rulers understood that without reform, the empire would fall behind. One of these rulers was Sultan Selim III. He was thoughtful, gentle in spirit, but determined. He believed the empire needed a fresh start, and so he introduced something called the Nizam-i-Seded, or the New Order. It was a modern-style army with new methods and new training. But the Janissaries did not like this at all. For a while, the Sultan tried to move forward slowly and carefully, as if hoping the old soldiers would come around. He created small training units far from the main cities, hoping the reforms could grow quietly like a seed. But resistance grew louder, not softer. The tension between old traditions and new ideas rose like a slow tide. Eventually, the Janissaries revolted. Selim III was deposed, and the new order collapsed. It was a hard moment, a moment of great sadness for those who dreamed of change. But the dream did not disappear. It simply waited. And as the years drifted by, waiting turned into opportunity. A new ruler, Mahmud II, came to power, and he had watched all that had happened. He understood the danger of hesitation. He knew that reform could not survive unless the old system that blocked it finally stepped aside. And so, in one of the most decisive moments in Ottoman history, he moved swiftly, almost boldly, though the world around him remained calm. In 1826, Mahmud II abolished the Janissary Corps completely. The moment is remembered as the auspicious incident. After centuries of influence, the Janissaries were no more, and the empire breathed a new kind of air. With resistance gone, reforms could begin again, slowly, steadily, patiently. Mahmud II reorganized the army, brought in modern uniforms, modern drills, modern structures. He reformed government offices, rebuilt the postal system, encouraged new schools, and even changed the way people dressed. He wasn't trying to erase the Ottoman identity. He was trying to help it breathe in a changing world, to help it keep walking forward without being left behind. When he passed away, the empire was already shifting gently, like a great ship adjusting its sails to catch a new wind. Then came the next chapter of change, the Tanzimat era. The Tanzimat reforms announced themselves in 1839, not with noise or force, but with a declaration called the Edict of Gulhain. It promised fairness, equal treatment under the law, protection for life and property, and a new sense of justice for everyone living in the empire, from Muslims to Christians to Jews. It was a moment of fresh hope, a message of reassurance in a world that felt uncertain. These reforms flowed onward over decades, touching many parts of life. Schools grew more modern, courts more organized, taxation more predictable, and the army more professional. The goal was simple: keep the empire strong, keep the people safe, and keep the world outside from overwhelming them. Of course, not everything changed smoothly. Some people welcomed the reforms, seeing in them a chance for a better, fairer life. Others feared them, believing old ways were safer. The empire became a place where tradition and modernity walked side by side, sometimes holding hands, sometimes drifting apart, but always moving forward step by slow step. As these reforms spread, the empire's relationship with the world continued to shift. European powers grew louder in their influence. Trade increased. Diplomats visited with new demands. And in the middle of it all, the Ottomans tried to hold onto their own identity while also learning what the world expected of them. One of the most powerful symbols of this era was the rise of new cities. Istanbul, already a great and ancient capital, grew even larger. Cafes appeared with warm lights and friendly chatter. Schools opened their doors to students eager to learn foreign languages or new sciences. Newspapers spread fresh ideas. And across the empire, from Damascus to Baghdad, from Salonika to Cairo, this new energy created pockets of quiet transformation. Yet, even as life modernized, challenges continued. Nationalist movements in the Balkans grew stronger. Groups that had lived under Ottoman rule for centuries now wished to form their own independent states. Serbia, Greece, Romania, Bulgaria, one by one, these regions pushed toward freedom. Some succeeded quickly, others struggled for decades. But slowly, the empire's borders began to shrink. The Ottomans did not respond with rage. They responded with worry, with long discussions, with attempts to reform further so people would feel safe staying in the empire. But in the end, the world was changing and nationalist movements were powerful. The empire's loss of these lands was painful, like watching old friends drift away. Still, the empire remained standing. It kept breathing. It kept hoping. It kept trying to modernize, even as its territory grew smaller. Then came another wave of change, this time in the late 19th century, the reign of Sultan Abdul Hamid II. Abdul Hamid was a cautious man, a ruler who believed in strong central power. At first, he welcomed reforms, even signed a constitution, and opened a parliament. But soon he felt the winds of politics growing too stormy. He suspended the constitution and ruled more directly. Yet even these years brought growth. New railways, new telegraph lines, new schools, new hospitals, and new connections across the empire. It was a strange time, a mixture of progress and control, openness and hesitation. People argued quietly in coffee houses about what the future should be. Some believed in modernization. Some believed in old ways. Some trusted the Sultan. Some opposed him. But still, the empire kept moving forward slowly, like a great caravan traveling through a long night. All the while, the world outside grew more complicated. European nations competed fiercely for land, influence, and power. Alliances formed, then broke. Threats grew louder, and the Ottoman Empire found itself caught in the middle, trying to stay balanced in a world that seemed to be spinning faster each year. Then came the moment when this balance finally tipped, the Young Turk Revolution of 1908. It began not with violence, but with strong voices, carried by young officers, students, and idealists. They wanted the constitution restored. They wanted the parliament reopened. They believed the empire could survive only if it embraced modern government and shared power more widely. The movement spread rapidly, and Abdul Hamid II, realizing the pressure was too great, restored the constitution. The empire shifted again, gently but firmly, into a new political era. But even this hope-filled moment could not stop the storms approaching on the horizon. Within just a few years, the empire faced the Balkan Wars. These conflicts stripped away almost all remaining European territories, leaving behind deep wounds and quiet sorrow. Towns were lost. Borders redrew themselves. Refugees moved by the millions. It was a sad, slow chapter, one that drained the empire's strength. And yet, the story of the Ottomans did not stop. Even now, as the empire stepped into the final years before the First World War, it continued to dream of renewal, to reform schools, strengthen armies, and modernize industries. It tried to rebuild itself even as time grew shorter. Have you ever wondered what it feels like when a long story, one that has stretched across centuries, begins to move toward its final chapters? Not suddenly, not loudly, but slowly, gently, almost like a sunset that seems to last forever. As we drift together into this next part of the Ottoman Empire's journey, let's step softly into the early 20th century, a time when the world was changing fast, and the empire, old, tired, but still standing, tried to find its place within that rushing tide. So just settle in, breathe easy, and let the story wrap around you like a warm blanket. By the time we reach the early 1900s, the Ottoman Empire has already lived for hundreds of years. It has seen triumph, sorrow, peace, change, and moments of deep reflection. The reforms of the previous decades have brought new schools, new laws, and new hopes. But the empire was still fragile. It had lost lands in the Balkans. It had faced resistance, rebellion, and a heavy pressure of European powers who kept watching, waiting, and sometimes interfering. In 1908, the Young Turk Revolution brought a fresh wave of hope. These young idealists, many of them officers in the army, believed that the empire could be saved through strong reforms, a modern government, and a return to constitutional rule. Their voices rose across cities and barracks, calling for freedom, equality, and progress. Their message spread quickly, like a gentle wind moving through tall grass. Within months, Sultan Abdul Hamid II agreed to restore the constitution. Parliament reopened. Newspapers flourished. People debated their dreams openly for the first time in decades. It felt like a new beginning. A quiet excitement filled the air, not loud, but present, steady, and sincere. But as hopeful as this moment was, the world outside was not peaceful. European nations were racing toward power, forming alliances, building bigger armies, and pushing harder for influence. In the middle of this great competition stood the Ottoman Empire, still important, still strategic, but weakened by years of losses. Then came the Balkan Wars of 1912 and 1913. These wars were quick, fierce, and painful. The empire lost almost all of its remaining European lands, including regions it had ruled for centuries. Towns that once echoed with Ottoman markets, Ottoman prayers, Ottoman traditions slipped away. Refugees poured into Anatolia, carrying memories of homes they would never see again. It was a heartbreaking moment, a soft but deep sorrow spreading across the empire. Some people cried quietly, some prayed, some simply held their children close, whispering gentle words of comfort. The losses were not just military or political. They were emotional, human, the kind of losses that echo quietly in families for generations. And yet, even after these wounds, the empire still stood. It gathered its strength, tried to rebuild, and hoped that the worst was over. But the world was heading towards something far larger than anyone expected. In 1914, a conflict began in Europe that quickly grew into the First World War. It was unlike anything the world had ever seen. Nations formed two great sides, the Allies and the Central Powers, and the Ottoman Empire had to choose which path to follow. The leaders of the empire, especially those in the Committee of Union and Progress, believed that joining the Central Powers, Germany and Austria-Hungary, would give the Ottomans a chance to regain lost territory and restore strength. They believed that if the Central Powers won, the Ottomans would be rewarded, respected, and supported. And so, in late 1914, the Ottoman Empire entered the war. For many ordinary people, life changed suddenly. Young men were drafted into the army. Supplies grew scarce. The once familiar rhythm of daily life became uncertain. But still, people hoped. They hoped their sacrifices would protect the empire they loved. One of the first major battles involving the Ottomans was the Gallipoli Campaign, also known as the Dardanelles Campaign. This was a dramatic moment, not because of glamour or glory, but because of determination and resilience. The Allied powers, mainly Britain, France, Australia, and New Zealand, attempted to capture the narrow strait leading to the Black Sea. Their goal was to force the Ottomans out of the war and supply their allies in Russia. But the Ottoman soldiers, many of them young and inexperienced, stood firm. The fighting was intense, but it also created stories of bravery, kindness, and strange moments of mutual respect. Soldiers on both sides sometimes paused to collect their wounded. They exchanged small gestures of peace even in the middle of war. It showed, quietly, that humanity can survive even in hardship. Under the leadership of figures like Mustafa Kemal, the Ottomans successfully defended Gallipoli. It became a moment of national pride, a moment that whispered, "We are still strong." But victory in one place could not stop the storms in others. The war stretched the empire thin. On the Eastern Front, the Ottomans fought against Russia in harsh winters, with bitter cold and difficult terrain. In the Arabian Peninsula, a revolt rose with British support. In Mesopotamia, British forces advanced. In Palestine, long battles tested the empire's remaining strength. Slowly, year by year, the empire's resources ran out. Supplies, soldiers, hope. Families waited for news of their sons. Villages struggled with hunger. Cities grew quiet at night, with people gathering around lamps, whispering prayers. And yet, even in these dark times, the Ottoman spirit did not fade. People kept helping each other. Neighbors shared food. Mothers comforted one another. Soldiers wrote simple letters home, talking about the weather, the moonlight, or the sound of birds, small things that helped them hold on to peace. But by 1918, the war was nearly lost. The Central Powers were collapsing. Germany was defeated. Austria-Hungary was breaking apart. And the Ottoman Empire, exhausted and surrounded, signed the Armistice of Mudros in late October. It was the end of Ottoman involvement in the war, but it was also the beginning of a new and difficult chapter. As soon as the war ended, Allied forces began occupying strategic parts of the empire. British, French, Italian, and Greek troops arrived in different regions. Istanbul, the heart of the empire, was occupied. Ships filled the Bosphorus. Soldiers walked through streets that had not seen foreign troops in centuries. For many Ottomans, this was a moment of deep pain. Some people cried silently as they watched foreign flags rise in their cities. Others grew angry. Others simply felt lost, unsure of what the future might bring. The empire was now weaker than ever. The government struggled to respond. Some leaders accepted the occupation as unavoidable. Others resisted quietly. The people waited, watching, wondering what would happen next. The Allies soon drafted a treaty, the Treaty of Sèvres in 1920, that would have carved the empire into pieces. It would have left only a small portion of Anatolia to the Ottomans. Land that had been ruled for centuries would now be taken away. For the people, it felt like the story of their empire was being erased. But even as this painful moment unfolded, something unexpected happened. A new movement began to rise in Anatolia, led by a man who had already shown his strength at Gallipoli, Mustafa Kemal. He believed that the occupation was unacceptable, that the treaty was unfair, and that the people still had the power to shape their future. Quietly at first, he traveled across Anatolia, gathering support. Villagers, teachers, merchants, students, and former soldiers joined him. They believed in his vision of independence, dignity, and renewal. The movement grew step by step, town by town, until it became a full national resistance. This was the beginning of the Turkish War of Independence. While the Ottoman government in Istanbul remained under Allied control, the resistance movement formed its own parliament in Ankara, claiming to represent the true will of the people. The empire and the emerging republic now existed side by side, both trying to navigate an uncertain world. The War of Independence lasted several years. It was difficult, tiring, and filled with heartbreak. But slowly, the resistance drove back occupying forces. Victory came not through speed, but through steady determination. In 1922, something extraordinary happened. The Ottoman Sultanate was abolished. After more than 6 centuries, the institution that had once ruled a vast empire came to a quiet end. Sultan Mehmed VI left Istanbul by ship, marking the close of one of the longest continuous dynasties in world history. There were no loud celebrations, no fireworks, no dramatic scenes. Instead, it was a gentle, solemn moment, like watching a long, ancient book finally close. A year later, in 1923, the Republic of Turkey was officially established under Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. And so the Ottoman Empire, after centuries of life, ended not in a wave of destruction, but in a soft transition, passing its final breath into a new nation, born from the same lands but built on new ideas. The story of the Ottomans did not disappear. It lived on in memories, traditions, architecture, music, food, and countless quiet threads woven into families across generations. Even today, people still walk through old streets where Ottoman markets once stood. They still admire the quiet beauty of Ottoman art, the graceful arches of mosques, the handwritten lines of calligraphy, the soft glow of lamps hanging in historic halls. The empire may have ended, but its spirit, gentle, storied, and full of history, remains. Sometimes we pause and think what daily life truly felt like inside a great empire. Not the battles, not the politics, not the rise and fall of rulers, but the quiet moments, the gentle routines, the small human habits that made ordinary days feel warm and familiar. As we continue this soft journey through the Ottoman world, let's drift into those quieter corners of history, the ones where people lived, worked, prayed, laughed, cooked, and dreamed, far away from courts and armies, wrapped in the slow rhythm of everyday life. So settle in, take another easy breath, and let your mind wander gently into another time. Now that the political story of the Ottoman Empire has carried us to its end, the deeper and more human story begins to open up. Because an empire, no matter how large or powerful, is not built only by sultans or soldiers. It is shaped more quietly by the millions of ordinary people who call it home. And the Ottoman world was full of such people. Villagers living beside calm rivers, merchants walking through lively markets, teachers reading by lamplight, children playing under fig trees, travelers moving slowly along dusty roads. If we move softly through the centuries, we can see them living their days without knowing they were part of something historic. Let's begin with one of the most comforting images, the Ottoman home. A typical home, whether in the fields of Anatolia or the winding streets of Damascus or Sarajevo, was often simple, warm, and built for family life. Picture a courtyard where sunlight fell softly in the morning. A small fountain or water basin might sit quietly in the center, its gentle trickling sound helping everyone start the day calmly. Rooms opened into this courtyard, rooms with low sofas, wooden chests, colorful carpets, and windows covered with wooden screens that allowed light to slip in softly. Families gathered here for meals, tea, quiet conversation, and moments of rest. Meals themselves were simple but rich in flavor. Bread baked fresh in stone ovens, bowls of lentil soup, plates of rice with warm spices, roasted vegetables, olives, dates, and honey. In larger cities, you'd find dishes influenced by every corner of the empire: Greek, Arab, Balkan, Persian, Armenian, Kurdish, and many more traditions blending together into one gentle culinary story. Imagine a quiet evening meal. Families sitting around a low table, sharing dishes, passing bread, laughing softly. No rush, no hurry, just the slow comfort of a day ending. This was life for most Ottomans. Not grand, not dramatic, simply human. And inside this world, another space stood at the center of social life: the market. Ottoman markets, or bazaars, were vibrant but surprisingly calm places once you stepped deeper inside. Covered markets like Istanbul's Grand Bazaar offered long corridors of small shops, textiles in one corner, spices in another, metalwork glistening under hanging lamps. The air carried warm scents: cinnamon, roasted nuts, coffee, soap, leather. Merchants didn't rush customers. Selling was as much about conversation as it was about trade. A buyer might sit down for tea, chat about family, weather, or news before ever discussing price. These simple interactions created bonds that could last for years. And speaking of tea, the Ottomans loved their warm drinks. Coffee houses were among the most peaceful social spaces in the empire. Men gathered to sip slow cups of thick, dark coffee, served in small cups without handles. In these coffee houses, conversations drifted about poetry, philosophy, music, and local events. Some people played backgammon, moving pieces gently across the board as lamps flickered around them. Others sat quietly, simply watching life flow by. These coffee houses were not loud or rushed. They were slow, steady, comforting, the kind of place where time seemed to stretch and soften. Now, let's step into something even more peaceful: religious life. Religion shaped the daily rhythm of the empire. 5 times a day, the call to prayer floated gently across cities and villages. People paused, washed their hands and faces, and prayed quietly. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't heavy. It was simply a comforting ritual that steadied the heart and reminded people to slow down. Mosques, too, were built not only as places of worship, but as community spaces. Large mosques, often at schools, libraries, fountains, and kitchens that offered free meals to those in need. Courtyards shaded by trees invited people to rest during hot afternoons. Scholars taught children under archways. Elders shared stories beside the fountains. And while Islam was the majority faith, the Ottoman Empire was also home to millions of Christians and Jews who lived under their own religious laws. Churches and synagogues stood peacefully beside mosques in many cities. Priests, rabbis, monks, and imams all served their communities with quiet dedication. For the most part, everyday life among these different groups was calm and respectful. People traded together, lived in the same neighborhoods, exchanged food during holidays, and raised families side by side. The empire's strength came not from forcing one identity on everyone, but from letting many identities exist gently together. Now, if we walk a little further into an Ottoman city, we reach another calm treasure: the bathhouse or hammam. Hammams were places of warmth, steam, and deep relaxation. People came here to bathe, to cleanse, to unwind after long days. Inside, sunlight filtered through small round openings in the dome, creating soft circles of light on the warm marble floors. Water flowed from bronze faucets into stone basins. Steam wrapped gently around the body, loosening tension, calming the breath. Women gathered in the hammam to talk, laugh, sing, and celebrate life events like weddings or births. Men came for quiet conversation or simple rest. The sound of dripping water echoed softly through the rooms, creating a peaceful rhythm that lulled many into a dreamy state. These were not luxurious spas. They were everyday places of comfort, little sanctuaries where people felt renewed. And beyond the hammams, beyond the homes, beyond the markets and mosques, another kind of beauty shaped Ottoman life: art. Ottoman art was not loud or flashy. It was subtle, delicate, full of careful patterns and gentle curves. Calligraphy was perhaps the most honored art form, with artists spending years learning how to draw flowing lines that looked both strong and graceful. These writings were often verses from scripture or poetry, placed on walls, books, or ceramics. Ottoman miniature paintings told stories in soft colors, showing scenes of daily life, battles, celebrations, and ceremonies. They were not meant to be realistic. They were meant to feel poetic, almost dreamlike. Ceramics from places like Iznik displayed bright blues and reds in swirling floral designs. Metalworkers shaped copper and brass into bowls, trays, and lamps that glowed with warm reflection. Carpets and textiles carried patterns that wrapped homes in color and softness. Art wasn't separate from life. It was part of life. People used it, lived in it, touched it every day. And then, of course, there was music. Ottoman music moved slowly, gently, with soft notes played on instruments like the oud, the ney flute, the cannon, and the violin. The melodies drifted like a calm breeze, simple at first, then growing richer as layers of sound joined in. Sufi music, especially, had a soothing, spiritual quality. It wasn't meant to impress, but to calm the heart. Listeners often closed their eyes, letting the soft tunes carry them into quiet reflection. Through these arts, the empire expressed its soul not with loud power, but with gentle creativity. Now, let's drift into the countryside for a moment. Most Ottomans lived in rural areas, small villages surrounded by fields, orchards, hills, or mountains. Life here moved even slower than in the cities. People woke with the sun, tended animals, harvested crops, repaired tools, cooked meals, and cared for their families. Evenings were simple: storytelling, prayer, stargazing, laughter among neighbors. Seasons guided everything. Spring brought planting. Summer brought long days of work. Autumn brought harvest celebrations. Winter brought long nights around warm fires. And in many villages, stories were passed down by elders. Tales of old heroes, saints, travelers, or mystical beings filled the imagination of young listeners. These stories were not written. They were carried in memory, shaped by each storyteller, softened by time. It is through these stories, these songs, these gentle customs, that the true heart of the Ottoman Empire lived, not through wars or sultans, but through people who wanted nothing more than to live peaceful lives. As centuries passed, all these traditions layered together, creating a rich cultural tapestry that stretched from North Africa to the Middle East, from the Balkans to Anatolia. Even after the empire ended, these traditions remain. They shaped modern Turkey, Syria, Iraq, Greece, Bosnia, Albania, Egypt, and many more regions. They lived on in recipes, music, architecture, family habits, and quiet stories whispered at night. And maybe that is the softest truth about the Ottoman Empire. Its survival was never only in borders or governments. It survived in people's kitchens and living rooms, in songs and prayers, in markets and bathhouses, in celebrations and daily routines. It lived in the way a mother folded bread for her children, in the way old merchants greeted strangers with warm tea, in the way neighbors helped one another in times of need, in the way cities balanced diversity with calm understanding. It lived in human kindness. It makes you think, doesn't it, my friend, how an empire keeps walking forward, even when the world around it keeps changing, shifting, and pulling it in so many new directions at once. And have you ever felt that quiet curiosity, that gentle pull inside you, asking how a place so old, so filled with stories, could still move steadily into a modern age? If those questions drift through your mind tonight, just let them float, nice and easy, because this part of our calm journey through Ottoman history moves into a time when the world itself was changing like a long tide rolling in and out. And the Ottomans, now centuries old, had to learn how to breathe in this new world and somehow hold their place within it. So let's settle in, let's relax, and let's drift deeper into the story. The 19th century was opening its long, misty doors, and the Ottoman Empire, now stretched thin in many places, stood at a crossroads that felt both familiar and strange. Empires rise and empires fall, but the Ottomans were about to step into a century where the old world and the new world collided, not with swords or cannons alone, but with ideas, machines, and laws. And before we go further, just take a small moment, breathe lightly, and imagine the soft echo of footsteps in old palace halls, where advisors whispered, papers rustled, and the feeling of uncertainty, mixed with hope, hung softly in the air. Because this next chapter was full of change. Slow, steady, heavy change. The kind that doesn't roar, but rather hums quietly in the background. By now, the empire had grown smaller around the edges. Places once familiar, Greece, Serbia, parts of the Balkans, were drifting away, forming their own paths, their own dreams of independence. And for the Ottomans, each loss was like watching an old friend walk out into the fog, never quite knowing when or if they would come back. But even in these losses, there was movement inside the empire's heart. A movement that said, we should change, we should adapt, we should try something new. And that gentle push from within, the desire to modernize, was the seed of something called the Tanzimat reforms. A long, slow effort to bring new order to an old empire. Imagine long tables in government halls, inkpots resting beside stacks of handwritten papers, candles flickering softly while statesmen leaned in, discussing how to rebuild systems that had grown too old to carry the weight of the empire. There were debates about laws, about rights, about equality among the many people who lived under the Ottoman umbrella. And the idea was simple, yet bold. Make life fair. Make the government clearer. Make the taxes easier to understand. Make the courts work the same for everyone. It was a slow, careful attempt to match the rhythm of a changing world. And although these reforms didn't magically fix everything, far from it, they did bring new ways of thinking, new voices, and new hopes. Now, while these reforms unfolded in quiet government chambers, another kind of change was rolling through the empire: industrial change. Railroads began to carve their way across the land, like long iron lines crossing through fields and valleys. Telegraph wires stretched across the sky, connecting distant cities with messages that traveled faster than any rider on horseback ever could. For older folks living through that time, it must have felt almost magical. The idea that a message could travel from Istanbul to distant lands in minutes instead of days. And for the younger generation, it must have felt like the empire was finally stepping into a new era, ready or not. And we can imagine the feeling of the first train engines arriving at Ottoman stations, puffing steam into the cool morning air, while crowds gathered to watch that powerful machine moving forward, steady and slow. A symbol of modern life entering a land shaped by centuries of tradition. But with change came pressure. European powers, Britain, France, Russia, and others, were watching the Ottoman Empire closely, sometimes offering support, sometimes applying pressure, and sometimes pulling strings behind the scenes. It was a time when diplomacy mattered more than ever, when every treaty, every alliance, and every negotiation could shift the balance of survival. One of the biggest moments came with the Crimean War in the 1850s, a war fought mostly against Russia, with Britain and France stepping in to support the Ottomans. The reasons were wrapped in politics and power, but the outcome showed something important. The Ottoman Empire was still valued, still seen as a major piece in the puzzle of world politics. And although the war was costly, both in lives and in finances, it allowed the Ottoman Empire to survive another day, another year, another generation. As the century moved on, the empire's identity became a topic of deep reflection. Who were the Ottomans now? After so many centuries of blending cultures, faiths, and traditions, were they a Muslim empire, a multi-ethnic empire, a European-leaning state, a Middle Eastern power? Those questions drifted through palace rooms, through classrooms, through coffee houses where scholars and merchants shared long conversations over warm cups of tea. And during this time, sultans like Mahmud II and later Abdulmajid and Abdulaziz worked to keep the empire steady, though each faced his own challenges. Some led with a vision for modernization, while others struggled to find balance between tradition and the need for change. But no matter who sat on the throne, the empire kept moving, sometimes gracefully, sometimes stumbling, but always pushing forward. By the late 1800s, another shift was happening: education. Schools were being reformed. New institutions were created. Young people were learning about science, engineering, administration, and languages. They learned not only the traditions of their land, but also the thoughts of distant places. And through these young minds, a new breeze entered the empire, a breeze of ideas, possibilities, and political visions. Some dreamed of unity through shared religion. Some dreamed of unity through shared identity. Some dreamed of a fully modern constitutional monarchy. And slowly, these dreams formed into movements. Not violent at first, just groups of thinkers, writers, and activists who felt the empire needed a new path. Among these groups emerged one that would later shape the fate of the empire: the Young Turks. They were not a single group at first, but rather a collection of people who wanted change, who felt the empire should have a constitution, a parliament, and more equality among its citizens. Their ideas spread through newspapers, pamphlets, private meetings, and quiet conversations behind closed doors. And even though the sultans tried to manage, and sometimes silence, these voices, the ideas kept spreading, like a slow but steady river carving its way through the landscape. Meanwhile, the world outside the empire was changing even faster. Germany was rising. Russia remained a powerful neighbor. Britain and France were expanding their influence in the Middle East, Africa, and Asia. And the Ottoman Empire, once the mighty force dominating 3 continents, now found itself playing a delicate game of survival. balancing alliances, choosing sides carefully, and trying to hold onto the lands it still controlled. There were conflicts in the Balkans, wars that chipped away at the empire's European territories. Uprisings, negotiations, and long, exhausting battles left the empire weaker, more tired, more stretched. But still, the heart of the empire kept beating. In cities like Istanbul, life continued with a rhythm all its own. Markets bustling, ships passing through the Bosphorus, mosques echoing with soft calls to prayer, families gathering for evening meals, storytelling drifting through courtyards as lanterns glowed softly in the night. And that everyday life, the simple, familiar routines, held the empire together even when politics felt uncertain. By the final decades of the 1800s, one last major reform era unfolded, the first constitutional period. The Young Turks gained influence, pressing for a constitution that would limit the power of the Sultan and give a parliament a stronger voice. In 1876, Sultan Abdulhamid II approved the constitution and opened the parliament. It was a historic moment, a new chapter that felt full of hope. But the hope didn't last long. War soon broke out with Russia, a long and bitter conflict that strained the empire yet again. And in the aftermath, Abdulhamid suspended the parliament and took stronger control. Some supported him, believing he was protecting the empire from chaos. Others felt frustrated, believing that the promise of a modern political system had been taken away too soon. But through it all, the empire survived. Weakened, yes. Pulled in different directions, yes. But still standing, still breathing, still carrying centuries of stories. And as the century came to a close, you could almost feel the shift in the air. The empire was not the same as before. It was a place full of memories, full of old wounds and new dreams, full of people who still believed in its future, even as others felt unsure. Picture the quiet streets of Istanbul in the evening, the soft lights glowing in shop windows, the gentle ripples of the Bosphorus touching the shore, the faint sound of laughter from families sharing late meals, and the soft hum of life moving on, day after day, in a city that had seen more history than most places in the world. That was the Ottoman Empire at the dawn of the 20th century, a land standing between the old world and the new, between tradition and reform, between hope and reality. And now, as we move forward, the story will take us into the last major turning point, the years that bring the empire toward its final chapter and toward the birth of something new. There's a quiet moment when we ask ourselves what it feels like to watch a centuries-old empire, one that has stood for generations, slowly approach the quiet horizon of its story, not in fire and chaos, but in small, careful steps, in decisions weighed with care, in the slow rhythm of a world that seems to move faster than its heartbeat. Tonight, as we continue this gentle journey through the Ottoman Empire, let us walk softly into its final decades, into the years when the empire faced its greatest trials, and yet carried itself with dignity, resilience, and quiet determination. So settle into your chair or bed, take a soft breath, and let the story carry you like a gentle breeze across the Bosphorus, across ancient streets, across centuries. By the early 1900s, the empire had become smaller, more fragile, but no less remarkable. It had survived wars, reforms, uprisings, and the slow tide of modernity pushing against its walls. And still, it remained a place of quiet beauty. Markets full of conversation, mosques echoing with prayer, villages humming with life, rivers flowing peacefully beside ancient roads. But history, as it always does, was about to turn a page. The Young Turks, who had been gathering quietly for decades, now rose as a more organized movement. They wanted constitutional rule restored. They wanted the parliament reopened. And most importantly, they wanted the empire to embrace modern ideas, not just military reforms or bureaucratic changes, but a deeper shift in governance, education, and civic life. In 1908, their movement gained enough momentum to pressure Sultan Abdul Hamid II to restore the constitution. Parliament opened again, newspapers flourished, and cities hummed with excitement. People debated the empire's future openly, not quietly behind closed doors. It was a moment of hope, a moment where the heart of the empire seemed to beat a little stronger, a little more freely. And yet, change is rarely simple. With new ideas came new tensions. Nationalist movements in the Balkans and elsewhere grew stronger. People who had lived under Ottoman rule for centuries now dreamed of independence. Serbia, Bulgaria, Greece, all pushed to form their own states. Some gained independence quickly. Others struggled for decades. The empire faced the delicate challenge of holding itself together while respecting the rising desire for self-rule. And it did so with patience, diplomacy, and sometimes with quiet military efforts. Not because it desired conquest, but because it longed to maintain stability and avoid unnecessary suffering. Then came the Balkan Wars of 1912 to 1913. These wars were sudden, fierce, and deeply unsettling. Almost all Ottoman territories in Europe were lost in a short span of time. Cities that had been Ottoman for centuries were now part of new nations. Families fled, moving toward Anatolia, carrying memories of homes they might never see again. Yet even in this sorrow, the empire endured quietly with dignity, like a tree that loses some branches in a storm but still stands firm. This was a moment of reflection, of resilience, and of preparation. The empire had survived many changes before. It had faced crises, revolts, and defeats. And though this loss was painful, the heart of the Ottoman world continued to beat. Soon after, the empire found itself drawn into a conflict far larger than any it had faced in decades, the First World War. In 1914, the Ottoman leadership allied with Germany and Austria-Hungary, believing this path might protect the empire's remaining lands, strengthen its position, and preserve its legacy. For ordinary people, life changed immediately. Young men were drafted. Families worried about the men they loved. Cities felt the tension of distant battles creeping closer with every passing day. The Gallipoli campaign became one of the empire's defining moments. Though the campaign was brutal and exhausting, the Ottoman soldiers, many still very young, defended their lands with determination and skill. The campaign was not about glory, but about resilience. It became a quiet story of courage, of human perseverance, of ordinary men holding their ground in extraordinary circumstances. And through these struggles, one name quietly rose in prominence: Mustafa Kemal. He would later guide the empire and its people through one of its most critical transitions. But the war stretched the empire thin in every corner. From the deserts of the Arabian Peninsula to the hills of Mesopotamia, from the mountains of the Caucasus to the coasts of the Aegean, the Ottomans fought tirelessly. Supplies were scarce. Cities suffered shortages. Families waited for letters that sometimes never arrived. And yet, the empire held on, one quiet day at a time, one careful effort after another. Through this, the human side of the Ottoman story remained strong. Soldiers wrote letters home, often about the simplest things: the weather, the sound of birds, the shape of the moon. Villagers helped each other quietly, sharing what little they had. Life continued as softly as a candle burning in a window on a winter night. By 1918, the empire's position had grown precarious. The Central Powers were collapsing. Germany was defeated. Austria-Hungary was breaking apart. And the Ottoman Empire, exhausted, agreed to an armistice, the Armistice of Mudros. This marked the end of Ottoman involvement in the First World War, but it was only the beginning of a new challenge. Occupying Allied forces arrived in strategic cities, including Istanbul. Flags of foreign nations flew over streets that had been Ottoman for centuries. The people watched quietly, some with sorrow, some with anger, some with uncertainty. And yet, even in these trying times, hope was not lost. A new movement, led by Mustafa Kemal, was rising quietly in Anatolia. It was a movement of determination, vision, and patience. It would become the Turkish War of Independence. Imagine, if you will, the countryside of Anatolia during these years. Villages alive with whispers of resistance. Teachers, students, former soldiers, and townspeople meeting in quiet rooms, sharing ideas, and slowly building a vision of independence. Each day, they grew stronger. Each day, they carried forward the hope that the people could shape their own destiny, even as foreign troops occupied parts of their land. The War of Independence was fought not only with rifles and cannons, but with strategy, organization, and determination. It was fought with patience, careful planning, and an unwavering belief that the Ottoman people, and soon the citizens of a new republic, could reclaim their right to govern themselves. And slowly, step by step, the resistance succeeded. Occupying forces were driven back. Territories were secured. And in 1922, the Ottoman Sultanate, after more than 6 centuries, came to a quiet end. Sultan Mehmed VI left Istanbul by ship, and the empire closed its final chapter with dignity rather than chaos. In 1923, the Republic of Turkey was officially established under Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. And yet, even as the empire ended, its legacy remained all around. In the architecture of mosques and palaces, in the markets still humming with life, in the slow flow of rivers through old cities, in the songs, food, and stories that families carried across generations. The empire lived on, not as a government, but as a living memory, as a soft, comforting presence, as part of the identity of the land and its people. It is in this gentle, enduring spirit that the Ottoman Empire continues to whisper to us today. And if you've been enjoying this slow, calming journey through centuries of history, I would love for you to join us on this quiet adventure more often. Subscribe to the channel, and together we'll continue exploring the soft stories the hidden moments, and the gentle rhythms of history, told slowly, soothingly, and peacefully, perfect for resting your mind at the end of the day. Even after the fall of the empire, Ottoman culture remained alive in countless ways. The markets of Istanbul still carried the aroma of spices from the past. The streets of Damascus, Aleppo, and Cairo still held the echoes of centuries-old conversations. Ceramic tiles from Iznik glimmered in sunlight. Calligraphy, music, architecture, cuisine, and traditions continued quietly, softly, like the pulse of a memory that never dies. Education, too, remained a quiet beacon of progress. Schools that had been reformed under the Tanzimat continued teaching children new skills, new languages, and new ideas. Universities taught law, medicine, and engineering, blending traditional knowledge with modern methods. And across the empire's former territories, scholars, poets, and writers kept alive the rich heritage of thought, philosophy, and creativity. And let's not forget the music. Ottoman music was gentle, deliberate, and graceful. Whether played on an oud, ney, cannon, or violin, the melodies carried stories of love, devotion, and human experience. Softly flowing rhythms reminded people of the empire's enduring soul. Sufi music, especially, invited reflection, quiet meditation, and connection with the deeper rhythm of life. And so, even as political borders changed, as sultans came and went, as wars were fought, the softer culture of the Ottoman world persisted. Always there, ready to comfort, to inspire, and to remind the world of the empire's quiet greatness. When we think of the Ottoman Empire, it is easy to imagine grand palaces, vast armies, and powerful sultans. But the real soul of the empire often lived in the small, simple things, the soft moments of human connection, the traditions passed quietly from one generation to the next, the enduring structures of daily life that outlasted wars and politics. Picture the streets of Istanbul, softly illuminated by lanterns in the evening. Merchants closed their shops, carefully wrapping the last spices and textiles. Neighbors call out gentle greetings to each other across narrow alleys. The Bosphorus glistens in the moonlight, carrying the reflection of centuries of history on its calm surface. Ships move slowly, carrying goods, families, and stories to distant ports. Life flows on, steady and gentle, even as empires shift and change. It is in these moments, the quiet, everyday acts of living, that the true essence of the Ottoman world shines. Education was one of the most enduring achievements of the Ottoman Empire, quietly shaping minds and futures. From the earliest centuries, the Ottomans had valued learning, and even during times of political challenge, schools continued to teach children and young adults, passing on knowledge, skills, and values. Madrasas, or traditional Islamic schools, provided instruction in theology, literature, and law. At the same time, reforms introduced secular schools, teaching subjects like mathematics, science, foreign languages, and modern administration. Young minds learned both the wisdom of the past and the methods of the present, preparing a new generation for the changing world around them. Imagine a classroom in the 19th century. Children sitting cross-legged on wooden floors, soft sunlight filtering through small windows, ink flowing across paper as teachers guide them patiently, encouraging curiosity, reflection, and understanding. It was not a hurried or rigid education. It was thoughtful, deliberate, and calming, a quiet investment in the empire's future. The empire's architecture also tells a story of gentle beauty. Ottoman buildings were designed to inspire awe without overwhelming the spirit, to welcome rather than intimidate, to create harmony between human life and nature. Mosques often stood at the heart of cities, their domes rising gracefully into the sky, minarets pointing like soft fingers toward the heavens. Inside, light filtered through stained glass or intricately carved screens, casting patterned shadows on marble floors. Courtyards were shaded by trees, with fountains murmuring gently, inviting visitors to pause, reflect, and rest. Palaces, too, were places of calm. The Topkapi Palace, for instance, was not only a residence for sultans, but a complex of quiet gardens, courtyards, and rooms filled with art and history. Every corner reflected centuries of careful design, craftsmanship, and thought, an empire expressed in stone, tile, wood, and light. Even bridges, roads, and aqueducts carried this sense of quiet utility and elegance, connecting people and places with both practicality and grace. Art in the Ottoman Empire was often subtle, delicate, and deeply expressive. Calligraphy was highly respected, a way of turning words into visual poetry. From sacred texts to public proclamations, letters and words were crafted with such care that they became works of art themselves. Look closely at a page of Ottoman calligraphy, and you might notice the curves, loops, and flow that mimic nature itself, echoing the gentle bends of rivers, the sway of trees, or the sweep of the horizon. Miniature paintings, too, captured stories in soft colors and meticulous detail. They depicted daily life, historic events, and imaginative scenes, but always with an eye for balance, subtlety, and calm composition. They were not meant to shock, but to invite contemplation, reflection, and quiet wonder. Ceramics, textiles, and metalwork added another layer of beauty to daily life. Iznik tiles glimmered in sunlight, patterned fabrics decorated homes, and intricately engraved lamps reflected warm, soft light across rooms. Even in the humblest of households, one could find traces of artistry, comfort, and careful thought, small reminders that beauty could exist in every corner of life. Music was another thread that wove the Ottoman Empire together, softly connecting the past to the present. The melodies of the oud, ney, and canon carried stories, emotions, and spirituality. Sufi music invited listeners to reflect, meditate, and feel a quiet connection with the deeper rhythm of life. Folk songs echoed across villages, carrying tales of love, family, labor, and celebration. And in every note, there was patience, care, and a gentle pacing, just as if the music itself were breathing alongside the people. It reminded everyone, young and old, that even in change and uncertainty, life could still be beautiful, still be soothing, still be meaningful. The Ottoman Empire was also a place of diversity. People of many faiths, languages, and traditions lived together, often quietly side by side. Muslims, Christians, and Jews share neighborhoods, markets, and social spaces. They celebrated their holidays, observed their rituals, and respected one another's ways of life. This coexistence was not perfect, and challenges existed, but for the most part, the empire managed to balance its diversity in a way that allowed daily life to flow calmly, without constant tension. This coexistence shaped the empire's character, giving it a softness, a flexibility, and a richness that survives in its cultural legacy today. It reminds us that even vast, powerful entities are built not only on strength, but on understanding, patience, and mutual respect. Let us also remember the Ottoman countryside, where life moved even more slowly. Villages were dotted across hills, valleys, and plains. Families tended animals, farmed fields, baked bread, and cared for one another in rhythms dictated by the sun and the seasons. Evenings were often filled with storytelling, songs, and gentle laughter. Under clear skies, villagers watched stars appear one by one, reflecting on the day and imagining tomorrow. Seasons guided every activity: planting in spring, tending in summer, harvesting in autumn, resting in winter. Through these simple rhythms, life retained a sense of stability, continuity, and quiet comfort, even as empires rose and fell around them. And what about the people themselves? The true soul of the Ottoman Empire lived in its people. The mothers, fathers, children, teachers, scholars, merchants, and neighbors. It lived in acts of kindness, sharing bread, helping a neighbor repair a roof, teaching a child to read, or quietly comforting someone in need. It lived in resilience, enduring wars, famine, and disease with patience, courage, and hope. It lived in curiosity, learning new languages, exploring distant lands, creating art, studying science, and reflecting on philosophy. It lived in memory, preserving stories of past generations, honoring ancestors, and passing traditions softly from one child to another. And above all, it lived in human connection, the gentle threads of care, empathy, and community that made the empire more than stone walls, armies, or treaties. As we near the conclusion of our story, it is comforting to reflect that the Ottoman Empire's legacy is not only historical, but deeply human. It survives in the quiet corners of modern cities, in architecture, art, music, literature, and cuisine. It lives in the rhythm of daily life that persists across former Ottoman lands. It breathes in the stories whispered by elders to children, in the songs sung at weddings, in the soft prayer of morning or evening. Even after the fall of the Sultanate, the empire's spirit continued, not as a political entity, but as a living memory, a thread connecting past and present, reminding us that history is not only battles and kings, but people, culture, and the enduring beauty of ordinary life. So, as we slowly approach the final part of our journey, part 10, let us carry this thought with us. The Ottoman Empire was not only an empire of power, conquest, or territory. It was an empire of human experience, of small joys, quiet resilience, shared meals, gentle music, delicate art, flowing water, bustling markets, soft prayers, and the patience to endure centuries of change. It is in these details, these soft, human elements, that the empire lives on today in memory, in culture, in the hearts of those who seek to understand its quiet grandeur. And if you have enjoyed this long, gentle exploration, perhaps you will stay with us for part 10. There, we will softly conclude the story, reflecting on the lessons, legacy, and quiet beauty of the Ottoman Empire, its final whispers, its enduring memories, and the lasting rhythm of life that continues long after sultans, soldiers, and empires have passed. Let's pause for a moment. Take a deep breath. Imagine the slow flow of the Bosphorus at night. Picture lanterns glowing softly in an Istanbul courtyard. Listen to the faint, gentle music of an oud floating across a quiet street. Feel the comfort of shared meals, shared stories, and generations passing their wisdom gently from one child to another. This is the Ottoman world, preserved not only in books and museums, but in the quiet pulse of human life, the soft, enduring heartbeat of history itself. Have you ever imagined what it feels like to watch centuries of history slowly unfold, like a river flowing gently, carrying memories, stories, and lives along its course? As we reach the final chapter of our calm journey through the Ottoman Empire, let us linger softly in that thought, letting the gentle rhythm of time carry us through the last whispers of an empire that shaped the world for over 6 centuries. Tonight, we will reflect on the final moments, the enduring legacy, and the quiet lessons of an empire that, even in its end, leaves a soft, lasting impression. By the early 1920s, the Ottoman Empire had endured more than most could imagine. It had survived wars, uprisings, reforms, loss of territory, and the constant pressure of a changing world. And yet, even as its borders contracted and its political influence waned, the empire's spirit remained in the hearts of its people. Anatolia, the empire's core, became the center of a quiet revolution, led by Mustafa Kemal and his followers. It was a movement not of sudden fury, but of steady determination. One careful plan after another, one small victory at a time, the people reclaimed the right to govern themselves. It was the calm courage of ordinary citizens, villages, teachers, students, and soldiers combined that created the path to independence. And slowly, as battles were fought and borders secured, the empire's final political chapter came to an end. In 1922, Sultan Mehmed VI quietly left Istanbul. The Sultanate, which had lasted more than 600 years, closed its doors. It was a moment of reflection, not chaos. The empire did not vanish with shouting or fire. It left peacefully, like an old friend taking a long walk into the sunset. Its people remained. Its culture remained. Its spirit, though transformed, remained softly, patiently, enduringly. In 1923, the Republic of Turkey was established. Mustafa Kemal Ataturk took the lead, guiding the nation into a new era. And yet, as modern reforms transformed the land, the legacy of the Ottoman Empire continued to flow like a quiet river beneath the surface of daily life. It flowed in the markets of Istanbul, where spices, teas, and textiles still carried centuries-old traditions. It flowed in the streets of Damascus, Aleppo, and Cairo, where the rhythm of life had been shaped by Ottoman administration and culture. It flowed in mosques and churches, in music and poetry, in culinary traditions and family rituals. The empire's influence did not end with its political demise. It persisted softly, like the echo of a melody that lingers long after the instrument has fallen silent. Even now, the Ottoman Empire's architectural heritage continues to tell a story of calm elegance and human ingenuity. Mosques with their domes and minarets reach gently into the sky. Palaces, bridges, aqueducts, and fountains carry centuries of craftsmanship. Each tile, each arch, each carefully carved pattern reflects not only aesthetic beauty, but also an understanding of human space, light, and comfort. Courtyards invite reflection. Gardens offer serenity. Water flows gently through fountains and channels, reminding us that life, like water, moves on, shaping the world quietly but persistently. It is in this architecture that we can still feel the heartbeat of the empire, the slow, steady pulse of human care, artistry, and vision. Ottoman culture also lives on through its cuisine, music, and literature. Imagine walking through a quiet street in Istanbul and smelling freshly baked bread, roasted chestnuts, sweet baklava, and simmering stews. Every bite, every flavor carries a centuries-long story of trade, cultural exchange, and daily life. Food was not only sustenance, but also a reflection of a gentle, shared humanity. Music continued to be a source of reflection and calm. Soft melodies of the oud, ney, and canon drifted through homes, streets, and gardens. Folk songs told stories of love, family, labor, and community. Sufi music invited quiet meditation, offering a path to inner peace and spiritual connection. And literature, poems, stories, historical chronicles, preserved the soul of the empire. They carried wisdom, humor, reflection, and human emotion across generations, softening the passage of time. Education, too, remained a lasting pillar. Ottoman schools, madrasas, and later secular institutions had nurtured generations of thinkers, poets, engineers, and leaders. Even after the empire's political end, the influence of these institutions persisted. Young minds learned to balance tradition with innovation, history with progress, and faith with reason. Imagine a quiet classroom once more. Children writing carefully in their notebooks, teachers guiding them patiently, the sunlight falling softly across wooden desks. It is in these classrooms that the empire's values and knowledge were quietly preserved, like seeds waiting to grow in future generations. The people of the Ottoman Empire, of course, carried its spirit wherever they went. Villagers, merchants, scholars, artisans, and families moved, traveled, and migrated. They brought their traditions, recipes, crafts, and stories with them. Even when political borders changed, the human legacy remained gentle, adaptable, and enduring. And perhaps this is the most important lesson the Ottoman Empire offers. An empire's power is temporary, but its culture, its humanity, and its stories can endure forever. It is not only in rulers or armies that greatness is measured, but in the soft acts of daily life, in creativity, in learning, and in kindness. As we drift closer to the end of our journey, let us reflect on what the Ottoman Empire teaches us about resilience. It endured not simply because of force or strategy, but because of its people Ordinary individuals who lived, laughed, worked, prayed, and loved across centuries. Its institutions, art, music, education, and culture created a framework for life that survived the passage of time. And even when the empire itself disappeared as a political entity, its influence remained, shaping modern Turkey, the Balkans, the Middle East, and the Mediterranean. It is a story of persistence, adaptation, and the quiet strength of human civilization. Let's take a moment to imagine the empire as it might feel now in the quiet of our minds. A market where merchants gently greet each customer, passing bowls of sweet treats or cups of tea. A courtyard where children play softly, chasing each other while elders sit nearby, telling stories that float on the evening air. A mosque where sunlight filters through stained glass, illuminating marble floors and wooden carvings, the call to prayer echoing softly across the city. A quiet village under a sky full of stars, where families gather around fires, telling tales of ancestors, of journeys, of ordinary life that carries history gently forward. And in this vision, we can feel the true legacy of the Ottoman Empire, not as an abstract concept, but as a living memory, a gentle thread woven through human life, flowing softly across time. It teaches patience. It teaches respect. It teaches the value of quiet resilience and the enduring power of culture and humanity. Even as the world changes, these lessons remain soft and comforting, ready to inspire anyone who wishes to listen. Perhaps as you drift into sleep, you can carry these images with you. The calm markets, the flowing waters, the lantern-lit streets, the songs, the prayers, the laughter, and the enduring legacy of human kindness. History is not only about rulers or battles. It is about the people, the places, and the quiet, unending heartbeat of life. And now, as we close this journey together, I invite you one last time. If this calm journey through history has brought you comfort, curiosity, or a sense of wonder, please consider subscribing to the channel. By doing so, you join a quiet community of explorers, gently wandering through the stories of our past, softly discovering the moments, people, and cultures that shape the world we live in today. Subscribing helps us continue this slow, soothing exploration of history, one story at a time, one gentle step at a time, always at a pace that relaxes the mind and comforts the spirit. Take a final deep breath. Feel the quiet, enduring spirit of the Ottoman Empire stretching across time. Imagine the soft call of history, whispering through the streets of Istanbul, the villages of Anatolia, and the markets of distant cities. Let the melodies, the prayers, the laughter, and the daily rhythms settle gently in your mind. And as you rest, know that this empire, though gone from political maps, remains alive in the slow, steady heartbeat of human memory, culture, and kindness. Its story is not over. It continues in every act of care, every song, every meal shared with family, every lesson taught, and every quiet moment of reflection. And with that, our journey comes to a peaceful close. The Ottoman Empire, with all its history, beauty, and humanity, rests now in the gentle comfort of memory and in your imagination.